Let's do this. The Cult of Hockey podcast by the faithful and for the faithful. I'm David Staples of the Edmonton Journal, and I'm here today with Bruce McCurdy. And I gave it the extra roll there, Bruce, because I'm a little excited. There's some good news. The NHL is talking about, the NHL, Brian Burke, an NHL insider, is talking about compliance buyouts in the next season for the NHL. So, we're assuming there's going to be a season next year. I think there will be. Bruce, what did Brian Burke was talking on Oilers Now. Of course, Brian Burke is uniquely situated in the NHL because he's both a former GM and a former league executive, plus a former team president with the Calgary Flames. So he's
plus a former player agent, which is significant. He's been on both sides of the negotiating table.
Now, he was very negative on whether there's going to be a new season or not. And I think he's got a lot of concerns about the current situation in the United States, which I agree with Burke. It's in the short term, Bruce, I think the United States is really, really going to suffer with this coronavirus outbreak. So I think his position was like virtually impossible to have the playoffs this year. I just think he's reflecting the gloom and doom right now in the United States. I'm a lot more optimistic. We're not going to get into that, though. We're just going to talk today about compliance buyout and what that would mean for the NHL. Of course, there was a compliance buyout after the last lockout because the salary cap shot down, the amount of money, league-wide revenue shot down, and they needed to fit everybody's salary in under the cap. Right. So they allowed teams to buy out as two players. But first, Bruce, let's just go right now to what Brian Burke said on Oilers Now, and you did a post on this. So what did Burke say?
Yeah, well, he was working off the assumption that this year's season, including playoffs, are over, but that they would be picking up the pieces in time for the next season. But of course, there would be a huge jolt on revenues with the last 15% of the regular season plus the playoffs not being played. So the thought was that the salary cap would, instead of going up as expected, would likely take a hit. So he said, first off, we have to determine what the losses are. Does insurance cover the losses? In some places, I'm told it will, and some it won't. So what is the total loss? We've got 85% of the regular season, so we've got to figure out what that wage gap is, and there's ways to figure out moving forward how to deal with it. I've heard discussion of compliance buyouts to help teams get to this new cap to solve some of their problems, which they gave in the last CBA. Each team got 2 cap compliance buyouts, which were exempt from the cap. I've heard talk of that. So, and then he went on to suggest that before they get to that point, they better clean up their labor issues and extend the CBA forward so that there's no threat of a future labor stoppage 2 years from now, because that would be tantamount to mutually assured destruction, to use a term from the Cold War.
So we heard also Elliot Friedman talk to Stauffer today about this, and Friedman was also musing about this. Friedman's position on the new season is it's too early to tell, or excuse me, on the playoffs even it's too early to tell.
Yes,
and he'll know more. We'll know more by the end of April. He's exactly right. It's too early to know.
100%.
But if there's no playoffs, that's out of the $5 billion revenue. I think they were saying it's $1 billion gone from this year's revenue. And of course, now I just think all bets are off in terms of what the NHL can charge for tickets going forward, what the revenues are going to be going forward. No one knows any of this kind of stuff.
So many questions there.
So, man, and they did suggest it was going to be really rotten for free agents. And yeah, good luck. If the Oilers, that's interesting. It made me think if the Oilers had waited on signing some of the players like Cassian and whomever. But anyway, they would have got him for a lot less. But that's actually neither here nor there. Let's focus, Bruce, on next year compliance buyouts. So this would be the Oilers trying to fit in under the cap and other teams trying to fit in under the cap. So it's essentially the main question is, who should the Oilers buy out under this circumstance? Does it make sense to buy out anyone? Which contract really hurts the team going forward, essentially? Which player is getting, essentially, his performance is here and his salary is here, Like,
Hmm.
who's got the biggest gap between performance and salary? Where is that the most? So if it's like
Right.
here for, let's say it's right here for Oscar, Oscar Clefbaum, and
Hmm.
here it's closer to here for Draisaitl and McDavid. They're getting really well paid, but they're really good players. Who is it like,
Oh,
over here? So, what's your take initially?
I,
Who
I,
do you
I
think they should
rolled
buy out
out
anyone?
I rolled out four names for consideration at the bottom of my post. And number one on that list with a silver bullet has to be James Neal, and who has 3 years left at $5.75 million. Of course, that was the better contract that got traded in the Milan Lucic for Neal trade, but it's still a real boat anchor of a contract. Uh, Neal at age 32 is, to my eye, a declining force. I mean, he had a terrible year in Calgary last year, no question. And he came out of the gate like he was shot out of a cannon. In October, he was great. November, he was very good. And he had on New Year's Eve when he scored a hat trick at Rogers Place, that gave him 19 goals on the season, and he looked to be well on his way to a 30-plus goal campaign at that point. Well, here we are, well, it doesn't matter anymore. The season stopped a week ago, but here we are in March. He's still on 19 goals for the year. He was injured and he missed a bunch of games, but he also played a bunch of games, including a stack of time on Connor McDavid's wing, what should have been a plum assignment. And he hasn't scored a single goal in 2020. Well, you might look at that and say, well, what else does he bring? And Stauffer and Spector today talked about the leadership that he's brought to the room as having some value, and I'm sure that's probably true. But he's got 3 years to run. Is he going to be a better player at 34 than he is at 32? I doubt it. Does he? What does he bring now? Does he bring, strong two-way play? Not really. Is he a physical player? Well, he can be. He can be decent along the boards, but he's not I wouldn't call him a real sort of uh, physical presence out there in the general sense. He brings experience. He brings a great shot. He brings uh, some positives to the table. But man, 5.75 million for 3 years. I mean, basically they're looking at the same thing they were looking at with Andre Sekera last summer when they
Well,
decided
it's
to
different
do.
though,
Well, in some ways it's the same.
because it's a compliance buyout and not a
Yes,
regular buyout. It's
yeah. Well,
completely because under
uh,
a regular buyout, Bruce, I wouldn't be buying out James Neal under a regular buyout. Under a regular buyout,
mhm,
where you have 6 years at whatever it was, $2 million a
right.
year against your cap with James Neal. There's no way I'm buying him out this summer. And I don't like he was a solid enough even strength player, excellent power player. You would go one more year and see if you can get another
Probably,
decent year out of him.
probably. Mhm.
But I don't even think it's I think they would, like, honestly, because that's too stiff a penalty. But so this is a different than Sekera. So I interrupted you to
Well,
make that point because it's not that was
the
you know
math the math is the same in the sense that in the case of Sekera, you bit the bullet, um, bottom out to make $3 million in cap room. But with that, you also made a space on the roster for a younger, cheaper player to come in and take over the job and do it as well or better, which you can make the case certainly that Ethan Bear has changed the equation this year more than Andre Sekera would have at a far cheaper price. That even with the Sekera buyout penalty, that freed up something like $2.2 million for the Oilers to invest in other players. So the question is, like, even subtracting out the cap penalty for a buyout of Neal, could you replace him with a better player who costs less? In which case you have to think about. Like I've been thinking for a while. This guy is not exempt from being at least considered for a buyout this summer. That said, I dearly, dearly wanted and want to see him in the playoffs for many reasons, but part of which is just simply casting judgment on the player himself. If he delivers a strong playoff performance, then he's locked in. Then the decision is made. But what we've seen out of him this last while has kind of left me cold, to be frank.
well, he's been injured, Bruce. Like, and I really
Yeah.
think that
Oh, I know.
impacted his performance. So I'm going to go. I think overall this year, He was an okay even strength player. That's what we saw in our scoring chances project. He held his own as an even strength hockey player, and he was exceptional on the power play. Here's the good news, Bruce. You could
Hmm.
buy him out on the compliance buyout,
Yes, that
and then
changes
you
the
can
picture.
bring him back at a league minimum contract, whatever the new league minimum is. And you still have James Neal on your roster for one more year if you want that player. If he is such a great leader, that's how you would do it, I think. So you can have your with a compliance buyout. Now, if they would allow that, I don't know. I guess they probably
Last
wouldn't.
time they didn't. They made
Yeah,
anybody who got bought out couldn't return to that team for one
yeah.
year.
So there's that.
So
But
the
in any
Oilers, even if
case,
they wanted to bring back Eric Belanger, they couldn't have.
yeah, I was hoping he'd come back. Um, anyway, with the compliance buyout, like I
Yeah.
think both are really easy decisions. Without
Hmm.
just a normal buyout, no, you don't buy out James Neal. In my opinion, you do not. But a compliance buyout, it's 3 more years of this player who had a kind of a remarkable comeback year, which when I looked at it closely, this kind of player at that age, how likely is that? There was a real possibility. I think it was maybe a little less than it, but a coin flip. But there was a coin flip that James Neal was going to come back and have one more good year
Hmm.
at this age.
Right.
When we get to the next year, though, it's like 2 coin flips in a row,
Yep.
and you got to get heads each time. It's the odds are starting to go down that he's going to have good years. You have a chance right now to get under from that contract if this happens. This is a very easy, simple decision to get rid of this contract. The only issue is for all of these owners is going to be what is their financial situation like
Right.
because
100%.
they're going to have this is we're talking you and I were talking about spending Daryl Cates's money.
Yep.
Where's Daryl Cates right now? How hard? So every owner is going to be depending
Yeah.
on what industry they're in outside of hockey. Um, some of them are maybe if they're in the grocery industry, let's say, they're going to be doing okay right now. Everyone still needs groceries. But what if they're in the oil business or, I don't know what businesses Kate's in. I think did
He
you not
was in
sell
he
out of?
was in the drugstore business, and
Yeah,
now he's in the entertainment business. And I think both of those changes in status are working against him at this moment in time. I think
yeah.
being in the drugstore business would probably be pretty solid right about now, and entertainment is struggling. But
Oh man, so we
so.
don't even know if Daryl Cates
Hmm.
where is he going to be in terms of
Hmm.
being able to come up with the cash to buy out players. Like,
Right.
but so we're just, and this goes for any of these owners, and we don't have the answer to that. So we're just going to assume that it's that
Bottomless pockets.
yeah, we'll assume bottomless pockets for all these owners, which is not the case, which isn't the case
No.
for all of them. So
No.
Bruce, I've gone through. We've talked about the Oilers. I don't see them buying out. You never know. Like
Chris
it's
Russell would
possible.
be the only other one just to get that $4 million off the books. But Plan A would be to trade him. I think the way his contract is set up, they could make a move after July 1st to trade him. But otherwise, that 1 year buyout of that 4 mil to make room for another young defenseman, as they did with Sekera, there's some logic. There's some logic to that. It's very short term. There's only 1 year left, but if you got the buyout available, you have to consider it.
Yeah, I think that makes sense as well. If you get two such buyouts, then you might consider Chris Russell. Koskinen has a big contract, but he's earned it. He's earned it this year, and
Yeah.
they're going to need a starting goalie. There's no one in the offing. So, Bruce, I went through some of the other teams to see,
Hmm.
and I to see where they they might be, and it was very interesting and kind of disconcerting to see when we look at the forwards, and we'll go through each position in the NHL: forwards, defensemen, and goalies. And this is only rudimentary research. I'm still working on the post for this, so things may change. So I'm really going so far on their age, their term, the amount of money they're getting, and just at this point, kind of our general impression of the players plus their points per game last season. But the two players who absolutely scream for buyouts, were both Ken Holland signings. Yikes. With the Detroit Red Wings, Justin Advocator and Franz Nielsen. Advocator's 33, Nielsen's 35. Nielsen has 2 years left on a 5.2 million per deal. Abdicator has 3 years left on a 4.2 million per year deal. and they are just at the absolute rock bottom when it comes to point scoring for NHL forwards. Um, out of Abdelkader ranks 479 out of 484, 0.37 points per game. And Nielsen 474 out of 484 at 0.46 points per game. So they are absolute locks. It looks like, Milan Lucic, the Flames are going to get out of that deal. He's 479 out of 484. Other names that are
I got a
really.
question for you
Go
first on the
ahead.
Lucic deal. If Calgary buys that contract out, the Oilers are on the hook for $750,000 of that contract. Do they then get exonerated from the cap clawback against a contract that no longer exists? Do they get their 1/8 share of that buyout? I mean, maybe they'd have to pay, their 2/3 or whatever, but of their portion. But maybe that would improve the Oilers situation by 750K. In which case, we'll take it.
That would be fantastic. I don't have the answer to that question. I don't
No,
know
I
how it
don't
worked
either.
last time. There must have been some of those situations last time, but that could really work. That could work in the Oilers' benefit as well. Um, I don't think there's any others. Sekera, no, that's different because he got bought out already in
Yeah,
Edmonton.
they signed him to a completely independent
Yeah,
contract.
that's different. The Oilers are retained on Lucic. Yeah, that's one of the things that'll have to be worked out. So, Bruce, I'll just quickly run
Yep,
through some of the other
carry on.
names here that likely to be bought out or possibly bought out. Nino Niederreiter, Andrew Ladd in New York, Phil Kessel in Arizona, who looks past his best before date, Alexander Wenberg, a young player in Columbus who just has flopped since
Since
signing
his
a big deal. Here's a really interesting one. Jeff Skinner. He just
man, oh
signed this.
man, I
He's going to be
know.
starting. He's going to be on, I think, the second year of a. Did he sign for 8 years at 9 million?
I believe so.
Yeah, he's going to
72
be
million, wasn't it?
7 years left. So he scored 1.45 even strength per 60, ranking 294 out of 200 out of 484. But man, you're getting paid to be a top 50 scorer, top 30 scorer in the NHL at 9 million a year, right? You should be in the top 30 for scoring, even strength scoring, and he's 294th. So I don't know how rich. I understand. I don't know what the business of the Buffalo Sabres owner is. I understand he's extremely wealthy and willing to spend money, but that's one
Clearly.
where you'd think, I'm not. This is our chance. We're
Hmm.
just early into this, and let me just see if there's any other ones for the forwards. No, he's the most obvious one for who just signed a big new deal because there's some defensemen in the same category and a goalie or two. But what do you think, Skinner? You'd have to, if you had a chance to buy him out. It's a lot of money, but man, that's going to be a brutal contract. It looks like.
Yeah, I mean that then it comes down to the like you say the cash situation of the owners. The other fine print detail that I don't know about the CBA is when you buy out a player, like when you have a guy under contract, the escrow kicks in and it actually cuts into what they pay the guy in real money, right? I call them Bettman bucks, what they pay him, right? Like his contract is 9 million, but maybe he gets 7.36 or something because of the clawback of the escrow, which will be significant next year. But when a guy gets bought out, my thought is that they pay him real money, like 2/3 of the actual value of the contract. So that would narrow the gap of what the owner saves. And an owner that's in it to for the bottom line might be reluctant to buy a guy out. Just say, well, we signed this guy to be a star player, and this is what we're spending our money on, and this is if it has to go against the cap, so be it. So there'll be some conflicted um,
Oh,
thinking
yeah.
going on in terms of
It, yeah. It really matters, Bruce, how flush these owners are right now. Like it's huge. Let's just hope that Daryl Cates, from his time in the pharmaceutical industry,
mhm,
saw this thing coming and thought, oh, and cashed out of the stock market a month ago, and is just buying
yeah,
back in now. Uh, like it really, really matters. And this
yeah.
issue that you raise is just
Mm.
compounding that. How much money is what's the owner's financial situation? how much money is he willing to burn on his hockey team, essentially?
Right. Right, because you buy a guy out and you use the cap space to buy another star player. Well, guess what? You're paying both of them in real cash
Yeah.
terms. So
So
it's a
Cates has
conundrum.
always been a big spender until now, Bruce. Like he's
Yep.
really has spent
Yep.
buying out, um, paying for excessive, some people would say excessive numbers of management positions. Um,
Paying the heavy portion of front loaded contracts or paying the heavy
yes.
portion of back loaded contracts, which he's done both.
Yeah.
It's yeah, he's I think you figured out at one time we worked at this a little bit together on a post you wrote this
Yeah.
year, something like 20 million bucks that he paid over and above just by extra bits and pieces here and there, and it was some huge number
It
anyway,
was a
and eight
huge amount of
figures.
money every year. I think it was more than that. I think that might have been one part of it was
Yeah,
20 million. That might have been the contract part of it, where
yeah.
I think when all told, like in terms of like spending on management, extra scouts, all of
Oh
this
well,
stuff,
yeah,
like
yeah. Not that. That's just the
it was
player
just
portion.
now he's got a good downtown arena and a good downtown arena deal. So that's in terms of the solidity of hockey, but of course then there's the Edmonton economy. Anyway, this is
Yeah,
all uncharted territory. Well, let's just stick with the little world that we're
five
living in.
dollars in a barrel of oil.
Yeah, hopefully that'll change
Yeah,
um, soon. The other thing that's going
yeah.
to happen, Bruce, based on this is like, let's say all these players, and some of them good, like I could see Jordan Stahl getting bought
Hmm.
out possibly. Like he's not a point producer at all anymore. He's got 3 years left on a deal that pays him 6 million per. So there's going to be players like possibly Jeff Carter, Jordan Stahl, Kyle Turris, Kyle Okposo, Jonathan Drouin, Tyler Johnson, even Zach Parise, even Zach Parise. 5 years left on a deal that pays him 7.5 million per. So
And he's already 35 years old.
he's already 30, but there could be players that will come suddenly, kind of useful players at a much less dollar amount. The
Right. Come
teams that
available.
are
Yeah.
the teams are in a who knows what position they're going to be against the cap and in terms of finances, but there's going to be some players that you can fill in with as well. Kind of like the James Neal thing. If he can't sign with the Oilers, well, you could easily replace him maybe with Jeff Carter or who's suddenly free because the Kings bought him out, or Jordan Stahl if he's the captain of the Carolina team, so that's less likely that he'll be bought out. Let's move on to the defenseman, Bruce. And one of the most interesting names that I saw. Well, there's two really interesting names. There's some obvious ones. Carl Alsner, who barely played this year in Montreal and has 2 years left on a deal that pays him 4.6. There's Brent Seabrook, who's
Oh yeah.
clearly passed his best before date. He's got
100%.
4 years left on a $6.8 million a year deal in Chicago. But then there's some other names that were less obvious, and two of them really stuck out for me. Justin Falk in St. Louis, who's
Hmm.
just entering into a 7-year deal that pays him 6.5 million. What were
That
they
never made
thinking?
any sense to me
What were they
ever.
thinking? And PK Subban, who's got 2 years left on a deal that pays him 9 million per. So
Hmm.
this year, out of 234 NHL D-men who played more than 20 games this year, so that takes you right down to your seventh defenseman on each team. Subban, in terms of even strength scoring, ranked 184th. So he's not even like he's just at the very
Wow.
bottom of the top six. And Falk ranked 186th for even strength scoring out of 234 NHL D-men. So, I mean, the Subban decision probably might be fairly straightforward in terms of buying him out. Although, unless you think, well, he's just injured and he's going to come back, and that's a possibility. That's something that we don't know. That's something New Jersey would know better. That he's just had a bad year because of injury, and he's going to come charging back. But the Falk thing in St. Louis, Bruce. Oh God! Thank God that's not in Edmonton. Thanks. The Oilers
Well,
aren't facing that.
they're in first place, so they must be doing something right. And he's obviously not torpedoing the team, but that's a contract that doesn't even kick in until next year, as I recall.
Correct. Yeah, he's
So they signed him right away as soon as they traded for him a year in advance, and that's already looking like a boat anchor. I mean, it did right from the moment they signed it. I couldn't believe it was that much.
brutal,
So
brutal
uh, just
contract.
just to split hairs again briefly, Brent Seabrook, it would be an obvious candidate for a buyout, except he's already got some kind of long-term injury that they've slid him onto long-term injured reserve,
Oh,
and the insurance company may well be on the hook for paying that salary, and the owner may be very reluctant to buy him out when he can hide, basically hide the. I mean, it causes complications, but you can hide the contract on LTIR and let the insurance company look after it, and then it's no skin off your back. So it wouldn't surprise me that even though he seems an obvious candidate, that maybe they would just let it slide.
yeah, and I don't even like after all these years of having this CBA, Bruce,
Hmm.
the LTIR and how it interrelates with the cap and what it means for the
Uh-huh.
Blackhawks. Count me in as someone who still hasn't figured that out.
I think
Like,
they have two full-time lawyers at the league office that decide on a case-by-case basis how it works. The other one, the more obvious one, Carl Alsner, he is the Wade Redden of the this time's compliance buyouts, where Wade Redden was just such a slam dunk obvious candidate to be bought out last time, and Alsner not even in the league with 2 years to run at $4.6 million. Man.
yeah, there's a Shane Gostisbehere. I
Hmm.
think that's how you say his name. He's been a terrible even strength scorer. I think he was in the minors a little bit this year as well, if I'm not mistaken. 3 years left at 4.5 million. Okay, let's go to the goalies because there are some big names that I think might be under consideration. Um, so Pekka Rinne had a horrible year. He's got 1 year. He had a 0.895 save percentage. He's 37 years old. Man, that
Hmm.
that would be tempting. There's Jonathan Quick, 3 years left at 5.8 million. He's 34. He had a 904 save percentage, which for goalies who played, I think my cutoff was 10 games there.
Okay.
Um, for the 66 goalies who played more than 10 games, Quick ranked 46th for save percentage. Rene was 58th,
Yeah.
and Corey Schneider, Bruce, 2 years left at 6 million, was had a 0.887 save percentage, 64th out of
Another
66.
injury situation that may well be career
Who's that? Schneider?
Schneider. He only
Okay.
he only played 13 games.
Yeah. Okay. There's a couple really those ones I think are I wouldn't be surprised if any of those
Yeah.
players are bought out if you can. What about what about and did I mention Lindquist? Did I say him there?
I think we talked about Rene, Quick, and Schneider, but
Okay,
not
Henrik
Lundqvist.
Lindquist has 1 year left
Hmm.
at 8.5 million. They've got two good goalies, two young goalies who are really good in New York right now.
Hmm.
905 save percentage. He's 38, 8.5 million. He's a legend though in New York.
Yep.
So that's one. There's Carey Price, who's got 6 years left at 10.5 million. He had a 909 save percentage, Bruce. That's 35 out of 66 goalies. Wow. There's
And
Sergei
he's the highest
Bobrovsky.
paid goalie in the league, and
There's
a lot of
yeah,
years to run.
32. Price is 32. Bobrovsky has 6 years left at 10 million. He had a 0.90 save percentage, 50 ranks 52nd out of 66. I don't see the Habs buying out Price, but
Uh-huh.
Bobrovsky, like maybe you just think, well, the goalies are up and down and he's going to come back and be great. But if you have a chance to get up from under that, and if you have the financial resources to do
Yeah,
so,
that's the question. 40
so
million in real dollars is what it would cost to get out from those 6 years. Two-thirds is what they have to pay a guy on.
yeah,
I mean, they pay it out, over 12 years. They would pay him 40 million over 12 years, so 3.3 a year. But
wow.
man, that's a long time to be paying a guy not to play for you, isn't it? I mean, shades of Alexei Yashin.
It's also a long time to have the worst starting goalie in the NHL.
Wow.
If he remains that, now that's the bet. Like, will he?
Unreal how he collapsed this year.
I think that they can't buy it. Like, it's just so much money, and he
Mhm.
has been a good goalie in the past. So you just got to think. Well, I
Yeah.
don't know. It's these are all such difficult things to even talk about because we don't know the financial situation of the owners. We don't
Mhm.
know, you know, what went on with the player this year. Maybe there's some extenuating circumstances in their play, some kind of personal problem or an injury problem or something like that that we don't know about, and they're going to bounce back. But you know, the I don't know. Maybe Habs fans would freak out if they heard us talking about Carey Price as a potential compliance buyout, and they think we're just insane. Maybe we are. I don't know. But it just when you look at his save percentage this year, his age, and his contract.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I seem to recall he was something like .859 against the Oilers over his entire career.
That's a
I
nice
remember
recollection.
I was having a little bit of fun with that earlier this season. And I admire and respect Carey Price, but man, he struggled against the Oilers, which is fine by me.
I mean, a 909 save percentage, that's about league average, is it?
Mm-hmm.
I think this
30,
year it's about 910,
35th out of
66.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's right in
He'll
the
play
middle
more
of
than
the
10
pack, isn't it?
games. Yeah, that's so maybe they're probably thinking, oh, he'll come back too, and he'll be like in Martin Brodeur like levels and Martin Brodeur like longevity in his career, and he will be a good player for a long time, and we're gonna stick with him. Plus, he's our biggest name player, and we need to sell tickets.
And I
You
don't
know
think Montreal, the team in front of him, has been very good. So
that there's
uh,
that as well, right? So I doubt that he would be bought out.
Is Carl Alsner their highest paid defenseman?
Well, Shea
Well, I guess
Weber.
Shea Weber is, but
Well,
still,
that's the other one,
you
the
know what I
tough one
mean.
for them. Like he was a really good player, though. I think Shea Weber this year. Like I know he had some good spells at least, but again, he's got a long-term deal. But I don't think he'll be
They
bought
got
up.
they got a lot of third pairing guys that are dressed up as top fours. Is my experience watching Montreal this year.
I guess my bottom line here from talking about all this, Bruce, is the Oilers are one of the teams that have, I think, a really obvious compliance buyout to make.
Right. Yeah.
So that so if Cates can afford it, this is one time where if this were to happen in Edmonton, other teams might benefit it from a bit, but between if the Lucic contract, if the Lucic cap hit goes away, and they're able to get out from under Neal's contract, and maybe in theory buy out Chris Russell. I can see that making sense too if they can afford it. This could really work for the Oilers next year. This could be a really good Edmonton. What I'm trying to say is, in short, Edmonton could well benefit from this more than other teams.
Right. Well, it's instructive to look back at what happened in 2013-14 when they had the first compliance buyout windows to after the hard fought CBA negotiation that time. There was 30 teams in the league then, of course, no Vegas, and they could buy out up to two players, and it was almost an equal split. There was 10 teams that bought out two players, 8 teams that bought out one, 12 teams that bought out none. So it really wasn't like everybody got rid of two contracts, and I'm sure there was budgetary constraints, and uh, there was people didn't want to spend money on the player and then have to pay for his replacement. But on the other hand, I mean, you see some real poison pill contracts gotten rid of. Rick DiPietro, Wade Redden, just to name a couple that jump off the
Brad
page.
Richards.
Brad Richards was another. And looking at the list here, I can't see too many guys that bounced back and later went on to become, returned to be significant NHL players after they were bought out and came back in the league maybe with a different team and in a different role. But there wasn't exactly. I mean, Mikhail Grabovski, I guess he had a few decent years after that, but there was nobody that sort of obviously you're going, boy, that was a mistake, or he wasn't quite worth
No.
what they were paying him, but he was still a pretty valuable player who had a few years left. Yeah, most of these guys are ancient history, and I mean, 2013 isn't that long ago. That most of these guys have been out of the league for 5 or more years. So there's certainly no shortage of candidates. There's one thing that the NHL is always good for, and that's bad contracts. Usually, every team's got at least one, and more than one. And as you say, that it's other considerations. Can the owner afford to pay the outgoing guy and the guy coming in to take his place? Because even at 2/3, I mean, the cap space you're opening up, you're probably going to use it to pay other players. So it's just a matter of how high is your stash, when you go all in on some of these moves.
Alrighty. Well, you did a post. I'm working on a post, so
Yeah.
we're getting the most out of this little bit of kernel of news that's come out of the NHL, Bruce.
Hmm.
So, any other thoughts? I think that I've summed up my thoughts on the matter.
Yeah, well, the only other two Oilers that I named besides Neal and Chris Russell were possibly Mikko Koskinen. With 2 years left, I don't think they would. I think, I mean, you maybe don't like his cap hit, but I think he's proven that he's a solid NHL caliber goaltender. And you know, and the other one, Alex Chason. Well, I think if James Neal, the obvious choice, is gone, that just increases Alex Chason's value as being then the primary net front guy on the power play, which is frankly where he's delivered most of his value this year. And his contract's an overpay, but it's not a gross. When you consider his power play contributions, I don't think it's a gross overpay. He's only got one more year to run, and he brings some interesting elements to the table. So I don't see why they would do that. They have better candidates to use that option on should it become available.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how this works. Like, so with escrow, so the cap goes down. Let's say they have this tremendous 30% drop in revenues and the cap goes down by that amount. So then the new contracts are going to be a lot less, but then the old contracts are clawed back on escrow. But how does all that work?
Yeah,
The cap. We'll leave that for another day.
we'll leave
Bruce,
that to the lawyers and the accountants
yeah, we haven't even
and
thought about it.
the bean counters. I
Starting
mean,
to,
it's a very complicated scenario, and I mean, every scenario that we're talking about here is a what if case, and really, nobody knows how this movie not just ends, but we don't know the midpoint. We don't know where the restart.
or
Where is society at the moment of the restart? Where is the overarching economy?
yeah,
Uh, and issues like um, uh, how under control is that virus that's safe to allow groups of hockey players and entertainers to go here, there, and everywhere, and how is the travel industry and on and on. Like there's just so many things to consider. Here we're talking about the possible hockey related ones, and we're kind of doing it in a vacuum, but I guess it's all we can really do.
yeah,
We just don't know, do we?
yeah. You called it the virus. There's a big, of course, it's highly charged political debate over what to call it. Although most people just call it, COVID-19, which is fine. But
Certainly.
I like calling it the virus. I just keep it simple. It's the virus.
We know which virus you're talking about,
We
David.
sure do. We sure do.
We don't need to point fingers at it.
Yeah, it's just like the mall. We all know what the mall is. All right. Thanks, Bruce. Thanks for talking today.
Yeah, thanks for listening, everyone.
And in the meantime, and in between times, this has been another edition of the Cult of Hockey podcast.